go. Welcome, everybody, to Geezy Truth News. It is July 26th, 2026. We have a very special guest, David BAUMBLATT. Thank you very much for being on the show. You've been on the show one time before. It's been a couple years. It's been a while. If please tell us everything, all your updates, your intro, in case for the new viewers
Sure.
and for the people, for your back, everything. So lay it all on us. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I think it was 2 years ago around that we were on the show last time. So to the guest, my name is David Baumblatt. I'm an American born and raised in New York. I started my career out in the military, graduating West Point. After West Point, I entered the FBI in 2004, where I worked foreign counterintelligence. In 2007, I voluntarily left the FBI. I was not fired, not pushed out. I had my own grievances with the FBI, particularly of the FBI unconstitutionally spying on US citizens. In 2007, I sent a letter to Senator Chuck Grassley, never heard about him since. I've done a master's degree since. I went to Harvard. And then eventually in 2010, I left America. As I wrote in the book, I believe America has turned into a globalist corporation and it's heading toward some way, shape, or form, some type of collapse. As a fluent Chinese speaker, I moved to China where I worked with both Boeing and Amazon, where I came to the realization that the American globalist corporations are not necessarily our friends, and they will collude with any country on the world where there's money, and that the eventual collapse in America is, according to that same thesis, the globalist American government, globalist American corporations. I also had some misgivings with both of those corporations as they colluded with China. And eventually, I was put on an FBI watch list under investigation for the FBI for some sort of national security threat. The FBI has thus refused to speak with me in any way. I've been censored on media. Even the politicians refuse to speak with me. I'm currently in Hong Kong, and my passport's been flagged multiple times as I've tried to get work visas to other countries. And that's my story in a nutshell, but be happy to explain it further. But anyway, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thank you. I think you have a very interesting story, a very incredible story. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure we have a million questions for you. I don't know where to begin or end, but what do you think about everything? Do you have any regrets? Like what, or do you have, what kind
Yeah,
of, what's going on?
sure. And if you remember, if you go to my X site, and I've been suspended on X 3 times. This is my fourth account. But there's a
Wow.
video on X. That was my very first video that I posted in September of 2023. That's when I went out in public on social media. And if you saw that video, it's a very pro-Trump video. And I still stand by it. I believe Donald Trump is the best president in my entire life, my life, because the competition is low. I mean, let's just put it that way. The competition is low. But has Trump lived up to the expectations? I'd say absolutely no. But I did put a caveat. I always said Trump will not solve the problem. And I always said the best, meaning leadership, is yet to come. And we could explain where I think that state politics versus federal politics. So I think Trump has been, for lack of a better word, a big disappointment. That doesn't mean at all I'm into the Democrats or into any of these other GOP candidates. But I just think, again, is that faith in Donald Trump, I would be surprised if it's not shared by a lot of MAGA, which is also, you could say, a declining political party, MAGA. So, yeah, so Donald Trump doing a lot of great things. I think he talked a lot of nationalism, but I think he's sort of gotten in that same group, whatever. He's complicit with Israel, with the corporations, with the billionaire oligarchs. So he hasn't lived up to nearly my expectations. So I'm back to square one, and that is I'm not really into either political party or the politicians, and I think America is going to continue to decline and decline.
Yeah, 100%. Unfortunately, I see all that too. I'm very positive and optimistic, and I hope everything works out. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic. And, things that it's hard for me to keep up with all the shenanigans that are always happening. But, there's, with Trump and, I tell all these people, you say that each president prints more money than the last. And everybody, what does everybody want? And I say that it's a one party system. To me, they're all working the same. It's all the same thing. You talk to the Republicans, you talk to the Democrats, they all think they're smarter than the other. But then when you look, when I tell them it's like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, it's the same thing. They're all,
Yeah,
my research says they're all looking at the same thing, they're all doing the same thing. What's the big deal? It's just amazing how people just fall for the same thing over and over again.
yeah, and I could give an example of that. So my time in China, as much as the government wants to talk about evil communism or evil fascism, I mean, I view China more as a fascist country. My time in China, I've seen the corporations, American corporations, love China. Why? Because they love money. I mean, there's not really an ideology or a morality to America. We're a corporation, we follow the money. But an interesting to your point was when Trump was running for president, and I was more popular with the MAGA crowd then because I was pro Trump. And Gavin Newsom, who could be a political contender for the president, he traveled to Beijing and for lack of a better words, he kissed ass to China, to Beijing, and the MAGA went up in arms. Well, guess what happened when Donald Trump and MAGA went to China these last couple months? Same thing. So it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, wherever there's money. I mean, we look at North Korea. If there could be money made from North Korea, both parties would be there. So I look at America less as a country and more as a globalist corporation. And a corporation's about the money. And I think both of the politicians, both sides of the aisle, are working for the same donor class. When I was at Harvard, I went to the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and that is the Harvard Kennedy School has the most amount alumni of politicians in America. It doesn't matter if it's Democrat or Republican. The highest, you could say, the number one school alumni of politicians is the Harvard Kennedy School. So that school is a machine to produce political candidates. And I remember one class, and the class was about what does it take to become a politician? And they went around the room and they asked, and I was like, public speaking. Some people like, you got to be tall, you got to be good looking, all these answers. And the professor came back and they said, how much money can you raise? That's it. That's the number one thing. And I think part of the reason too, where people in America have lost faith in the system, it's not just how much money you need to go into politics, it's also our justice system. That if you have money to hire the expensive lawyers, the justice system can be changed. I don't want to change the topic, but this is also my story. I'm one of the few Americans who not only lived in China, but I had an unethical, I worked for Boeing, obviously. I was up for promotion in Boeing, which stands again, I was a good employee up for promotion. Then I became an ethical whistleblower. Boeing retaliated me and fired me. I'm one of the very few Americans. I sued Boeing, which of course Boeing is all about pro-American, pro-military veterans, which you should say, why is the military industrial complex Boeing even in China colluding with the Chinese government? That's another story. But anyway, I sued Boeing both in China and in America. So this goes to my story about the justice system. As an American military veteran, I won my case in China. In America, I lost, but it's even worse. I wasn't even allowed to present my case in court. The federal judge colluded with Boeing and arbitrarily ruled in favor of Boeing. And not only as a US citizen, after paying $50,000, a lot of money on lawyer fees, I didn't even get a chance to present my case in court. So back to the original question about running for politics. Basically, what the professor says is, if you're rich, you'll be a politician. If you're not, no. You don't think that's the same with our justice system? If you have money, I mean, how many people would you, if you're an average American citizen, would assume that an American citizen would get justice in China, but not in America as a military veteran? And so what do I look at America anymore? I just don't see it as a country. I see it as a corporation, and it's ruled by money and our value system. And this is, be very careful to the American people. And I'm talking with someone, if you look at my record, I am, or I was, a pro-Trump supporter. I'm dropping, but I was. I've never been a supporter of any Democrats. Well, guess what? Donald Trump and this Department of War and his reign of terror in the world, which that was never what he promised. But when he preaches there's no more international law, it is might makes right. be very careful because our policies, our foreign policies, can be very quickly our domestic policies. And if you're an American citizen says, yeah, whatever it is, man, it's doggy dog world in America. If we got to bomb countries and kill people because that's what we got to do, who cares about law? Who cares about morality? Well, today it's what's happening in foreign countries. Tomorrow it could be how the US government treats US citizens domestically. Be very careful. So it's back to my point about how money and corruption is ruling. I don't see us having a base anymore of either morality or even legality. It is turning into a very sense of a very dysfunctional government where the powerful rule and the rest of us, we either follow or like me, I just left.
Yeah, sounds about right. It's really incredible. So the jokes write themselves, and you know what's going to happen with everything in the country. What do you predict in the future? You said
Yeah,
that it's going to
so
keep going
and
down.
I write this in the book, and I'm not saying it's going to go one, two, three, but it's going to go one. So the first phase is what's going to be called collapse. That will happen. The second phase, it could happen, is revolution. And the third phase is called civil war. Now, remember, I know it sounds hyperbole, but I thought this back in 2005, and then I left America in 2010. So, first, we've already had a civil war in America, number one. Even major collapses, the Soviet Union collapsed down to Russia. So, this is not conspiracy, this is history books. I believe the collapse will happen initially primarily economic, because as I've said, nothing is really holding America together. We are not a Christian nation anymore in America. It is what it is. We're no longer Christians. We're not a European country anymore in America. In fact, we don't really have our freedoms, like freedom of speech. I could go into how I was censored. So, what's holding us together as an American? Because in other countries, like I could say China, the Chinese country is held together for things other than money. But for us, I really think it's money. It's the same reason why you're working in a corporation, even though there's a superficial relationship that you may have with your boss, your coworkers. At the end of the day, no paycheck, you're gone. There's no loyalty. You just go to work for purely a paycheck, which could have been different 100 years ago when you're working for maybe smaller companies where there is a relationship with the boss, where you could say maybe that company was a quasi family. But now we're corporations. I work for Amazon. Everyone's working for these corporations. So there's no loyalty and it's only money. So that same concept goes with America, the corporation. Once economic hardship comes, this place is going to fall apart. And I'm going to double down on that as a West Point graduate. If you think our military soldiers are serving for duty, honor, country, those days are done. I view our military as government mercenaries. Now, I don't have a problem with mercenaries, but you don't think a mercenary for their service. They're doing it purely for money. And the point is that's exactly what they're serving in the military, in the government, is purely for money. So that's where the collapse is. Once the money train stops, this is going to collapse. And how do I think that money train is going to stop? Well, for a lot of reasons, but in terms of the debt, the US dollar. But I would summarize it quickly right this. There will be three reasons why America will finally go under. One, and this goes to what I was talking about, the money, it's the debt. There's not just a lot of personal debt in America, but government debt. It's out of hand. In fact, I'm just going to use an example, the student debt. But if you have personal debt and the government says you have to pay off that debt, okay, do you think the government's going to pay off their debt? So the point is, if our own government and our own politicians who are leaders do not have the leadership responsibility to pay off the national debt, they never will, then why should you as an individual? So the first problem is going to be the debt, both individual and government. It's going to get worse. The second, I keep saying it, is the level of corruption. More and more Americans are realizing that both corporations and our government, the corruption is getting out of hand. They are going to lose faith and trust in following the law, meaning they're not going to trust the law. They're not going to trust these institutions. They're not going to trust voting. They're not going to trust. And that's going to be a major problem. And then the third one, and I don't want to sound kumbaya. If anyone's seen my videos, trust me, I'll be accused of being a racist and a far right. But I believe in this, that the number one enemy isn't the liberal or the far right. It's the 1%. And what is that? Economic inequality. So to reiterate, it's going to be debt, it's going to be corruption, and let me expand on income inequality. Now, I'm a proud capitalist. This is, and people would say, you're in China. We could explain later on that. Again, I don't view China as communism, but I'm just saying that America is no longer a capitalist country. We were. We have something called now corporate capitalism. And you can label this system however you want. You could put whatever label you want. But if this economic system is geared to continue to put money in the top 1%, and take money away from the middle class to where the top 1% gets a larger and larger economic pie in America. You call that system whatever you want. It's not going to work, people. It's not going to work. And that's what I say about there is a little of that kumbaya that the MAGA people think that these pink-haired feminists or these homosexual men, we'll just say liberals, are ruling the world or ruling America. Or the liberals think that these so-called neo-Nazis, who are probably a lot of them working at McDonald's or unemployed, they're ruling the world. Probably not. I would say who has the power, who has the money. And so look at that 1%. And I would say, in a sense, there is truth that the far left and far right, all in the middle, they can combine. And people are realizing that the number one enemy to America, which is similar to what I write in the book, like the globalists, is these top 1%. So I say again, part of the reason that America, and again, this is not nuance. This is just history where countries and empires collapse. But the rate of debt, the rate of corruption, and the rate of income inequality, I see no measure that it's going to change, invert, decrease. Even with Donald Trump, the MAGA savior, it's gotten worse and worse. In fact, let me put it down. Now, I've said Donald Trump, I still believe, is the best president in my entire lifetime. Because it's not like the competition's hard, people. I mean, look at the competition out there. I mean, it's weak. But I actually think Donald Trump will go down as the most corrupt president in history in terms of his financial corruption, where he has utilized the White House for him, his family, his partners, the oligarchs, to enrich themselves immorally and illegally. Now, there's certain things I like. He wants to do away with birthright citizenship. This is where I'd be called a neo-Nazi. That's fine. I like the birthright citizenship, illegal immigration. There's things he's doing. But I still believe it is what it is. Donald Trump, his sense of enrichment of using the White House for his personal gain could quite possibly top the record books of any president. But then if you look at me and say, well, David, what do we do? Nothing. Well, I think that goes into the end of the conversation. All I could say is there's a leadership philosophy that we learn in the military, and it's called lead, follow, or get out of the way. All three are fine. People say get out of the way is not leadership, it's quitting. No, I mean, you've probably heard of a person working in a corporation where everyone is getting bad word shit on, where everyone's working in a corporation and you're getting screwed over by the boss. But one person stands up and says, I'm not going to take this anymore, and I quit. That takes courage. That takes a lot of courage to walk out. That's a sense of leadership he's in. So that would be get out of the way. Followership is if you're not the leader, find someone who can lead. I think a lot of people put their faith in Donald Trump. I don't think he's the answer. I don't see any politicians that are the answer. I believe that the future of America will be state first and not America first. But find a leader and follow. Remember, leadership is about teamwork. You can't have leadership without followership. So stop complaining and follow a leader. Or 3, you become a leader. So what did I choose? Well, in 2010, I said, I'm just going to get out of the way, and I left. And I'm not going to correlate myself. If everyone remembers that Ruby Ridge incident with the FBI, you had an American citizen who just wanted to be left alone. He went into the mountains of Ruby Ridge, and the FBI just went after him. Here you have a U.S. citizen. When I left America in 2010, I never complained. I am very thankful that I was born and raised in America, and America gave me tremendous gifts. But at the end of the day, without making this so nuanced, it's almost like working in a company like Enron, and you're very thankful that Enron hired you, you're working there, but you just believe Enron is going to collapse. And you just simply say, I'm going to quit. And that's all I said. I believe America is going to collapse. And I went there not like I'm colluding with China, or I've never advertised that China is so much better, but I believe America is going to collapse. So I left. And what did my American government do? They don't like it Because one thing you're going to realize is during American good times, and this happens with every country, the legal system is more transparent. But as our country becomes more and more unstable, you as an American citizen who doesn't do anything illegal, but you start pushing up against the political atmosphere of the status quo and the government, you could be labeled as a dissident, as a terrorist, just like people throw around the word racist. And I'm telling you, the FBI will designate you a terrorist. They will secretly put you on a list, and it could ruin your life. But so anyway, so that's why I've left, and the government is still. So meaning, if the government is going to chase me, be very careful. And that's why I tell to the American people, I would be more worried about the American government taking away your freedoms, your Christianity, your European culture than Russia, China, or even Iran. Like, does this war in Iran really take the place of a national security threat to Americans? We have other things to do. This is probably a war for Israel. And if you're an American citizen who are paying your taxes, well, then it's going to Israel and enjoy the war. So I say again, as an American, your biggest threat is probably from the US government and the US global corporations versus other entities abroad. So a lot of answers going around, but I'm trying to put that philosophy and ideology together.
Very good. Wow. Yeah, it seems like it's all controlled and planned. Trump, I voted Trump 3 times, but like you said, it's like all the politicians do the same thing. They all, it's all one uh party system, and it's they all lobbyists. They all get paid by the lobbyists to do what they need to do. So, that many times I read that, Americans are opposed to many different kinds of things, and then the politicians will do it anyway because they're being paid by
Yeah,
the lobbyists.
yeah, I think so. Many people say this can't be true. The politicians must know about you. They do, which is interesting. I'll just bring this up as proof. They know about me. But on X, I think his name is it Andrew Massey or Thomas Massey from Kentucky, which is interesting. I've supported him. I've even said many times I think the guy's doing well. He's blocked me on X, so the politicians know about me without. But here's the question: when people say, David, this can't be happening. They must know about you. Why wouldn't they help you out? I'm going to reverse that question. I'm going to tell you what we learned at Harvard. My question is, why would they help me out? Because just like I said, that people in the government, to include even West Pointers, are no longer serving for duty on our country. I talk about paycheck and pension. The number one mission of these politicians is to get reelected. It's not to serve you. I know that might sound as a surprise. It is to get reelected. By them helping me out, are they going to get reelected? I don't know. Maybe it could cause harm. But I could tell you something. If I was a heavy donor, we'll say I gave $100,000 or $1 million to one of these politicians, I would have that politician on speed dial and say, yeah, Tom Cotton, hey, Tom, this is David. I got a problem. And he'd say, absolutely, David. Let's talk later today. And what do I mean by this? Welcome to the corporation where money rules. So, as a politician, what is in their favor to help me out? And you might say, but they have a duty to. They swore an oath. Duty on a country that, oh, welcome to the real world. This is a corporation. Now, there are times a politician will help you out and you're not going to give them money because they think it's in their best interest for reelection. It gives them good publicity, good media, but never forget their number one job is to get reelected, not serve the American people because they technically serve their donors. Why? Because without money, there's no reelection. Well, they don't get their money from normal American citizen. They get their money from donors. So if you really want to ask who do the politicians serve? Well, they serve their donors. They don't serve me or you. So that would be the question going back. I'd ask you, why would the politicians help me out? Oh, you're a military veteran. It's all fluff. It's the same thing, thank you for your service. It's all, we are a corporation and money rules. End of story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just seems like it's a slow boiling frog technique. It seems like they're all just Everything is getting worse a little bit at a time. They keep printing the money. The
Yeah,
presidents keep printing more than the last, and everything just keeps getting worse and worse. So what are the solutions? What is everybody going to do? What
yeah.
and most people don't care or too busy to care.
Yeah. So I'd be very worried about the money situation. That is, let me try to correlate the money situation to the COVID vaccine because the COVID vaccine hopefully is on everyone's mind. Um, Obviously, I never got the COVID vaccine. I didn't even contemplate. But the point being is when the United States government or state hand out free stuff, remember, forget a free vaccine, free anything free, because it's coming to the point, just like a corporation, nothing's free. So if they hand out something free, there's an attachment. So remember the free vaccines? Okay, not a good idea. But you might have heard of something called universal basic income, which is basically free money. Great idea, right? What do I think? I think we're probably going to be on verge of an economic collapse. And you got to use common sense. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You're a billionaire, you're a trillionaire. If the system collapses and the money becomes worthless and there's a violent revolution, then you being a billionaire is not that important. So there is pressure on these billionaires to keep the system going so they could live a life of luxury. So, one of the ways during an economic collapse, because I believe it's 3 meals away from revolution, meaning people have to be, meaning you could tell in America there's a lot of guns, there's a lot of violence. This thing could spark. Maybe one of the ways to calm and sedate the masses is universal basic income. Just enough money where you feel like, okay, and it's great. You don't have to work, right? I mean, it's a great advertisement, just like the COVID vaccine. It's free. It'll protect you. You don't have to be afraid. You'll be immune from, because people who are afraid, they thrive on this safety. So universal basic income. You're not going to be rich, but you don't have to work and you still get your minimum amount of food. And that money for universal basic income will still be at a minor fraction to where the billionaires can still live a life of luxury, where they're considered to be rich. But I'd be very worried when you hear free money, universal basic income. To me, it's like a preparation that an economic collapse is coming and they don't want the American people to reach for their guns and rather just take the free money and just be a docile human being. But in terms of solution, I would say this, and I've said this before, and if you believe, so you're like, listen, David, I don't want to leave America. This is my home. I was born here. I get that. You want to stay. And there's another option. You don't want to do that. And that is you want to live off the grid. Like you're like, I'm not interested in moving to the mountains of Wyoming where I'm off the grid. I don't pay tax, which that's an option, but I get that. You're like, I can't live on a farm and that. Okay. Well, then I'm going to tell you that so you're going to get involved in politics. I would say that America first is a day late and a dollar short. It's going to be state first. Now, these trials and errors of state first have tried before hundreds of years ago in America through American history. I think the difference now is because the situation in America is getting worse and worse, you're going to face collapse. But I think if you put your political capital in Washington, D.C., where your hope is the next president, I think it's a failed strategy. I would start saying, we're going to just take a guess, and you're from Texas. I would start saying the new political strategy is Texas first, America second. The Texas flag first, the American flag second, the Texas governor first, the president second. The problem is, and I talk about revolution, if you keep going that way, and it could happen, a state can get flooded, especially a small state. Like, think of a state like Wyoming. I believe Wyoming has a population, I think it could be about 500,000, meaning it's one of the smallest states. So a state like California, New York, it's too big. But it's possible one of these small red states can get flooded, meaning flooded with patriotic or whatever, red voting people, and they vote because what did I always say about Donald Trump? The best is yet to come. And I believe there could be a political leader. So now I'm the governor of Wyoming. And we're talking Wyoming is now 95%. These people are hardcore, whatever your political ideology is, but it's probably going to be red conservative. And they're going to have one platform that says secession, that they're going to vote on no federal taxes, probably still state taxes, but no federal taxes, and that's secession. because it's going to be so red that they don't care. And they're going to get a governor who's going to have courage, who's going to push back. When that happens, then you're going to go into the second phase of what my prediction. You're going to get past collapse and you're going to get into a revolution. Where revolution and civil war is not the same, where revolution is going to be looked upon DC. Not that the state wants to attack Washington, D.C. They just want to secede. They want to be left alone. But Washington will never allow it. They're going to send in military troops there. Now we're talking state law versus federal law. We're talking state militia, national guard. You get what I can. So it's not as if the state is going to try to do some uprising, even though that's what Washington, D.C. will say. But the point is very simple. Any American state that tries to secede from the Union will be considered by Washington, D.C. a national security threat. And Washington, D.C. will start, you could say, the violence. Now we're starting to get into revolution. But I think that's the key. I think a lot of Americans are getting to the point that this union called of America, which is 350 million Americans of diversity, we don't feel a union anymore. And I think even Americans, we'll just say again, the state of Texas would say, you know something, those people in California, I really don't care about them. I'm fine if we secede, you know, and I think that mentality is going to increase and increase until they finally elect a governor where the governor says, yeah, well, why are we doing this? Because I don't want to change the subject, but it goes into this. But this whole thing about fraud and the Doge thing, it's never going to work. The best way to take out the fraud, we're going to say, like in Minnesota, you know, there's incidents with the fraud, with the Somalis, everything. It's never going to work. The best way to rid yourself of the fraud is just stop paying your taxes. Where I think a lot of these red states are just going to say, we're tired of the fraud or the waste and spending. Let's just stop paying our federal taxes. And once that happens, then I think people are not going to care about California or Minnesota. I mean, whatever their failed policies or corruption is, because they know themselves in Texas, well, I don't pay federal tax anymore, so I don't care. So I'm just going to focus on the Texas state government. But I think that's what's going to happen. And I think it's common sense when you have something called forced diversity, immigrant, everything, that eventually the union's going to split. So that's what I would say is, one, if you don't want to leave America, I get it. If you don't want to live off the grid and just weather out the storm, think of like living on a farm. And, you know, some people it's very difficult. Then I would say is if you continue to put your hopes and faith in Washington, D.C. and voting, I think it's a lost cause. And that you have to flood a state, or even if you're a blue, flood the blue state and same thing. Again, we're not alike, but we have a common enemy. But I think secession is going to be more and more. It's just bound to happen.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say, and we live in very amazing and interesting times. I personally think that the voting doesn't even count. I think it's like you said, it's all about money, and it's all about they count the votes and they plan the storybook and they plan everything. They know what they're doing, you know. They've been doing this for a
Yeah,
long
and
time. They're going to keep going.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm a little surprised that I was blocked by Thomas Massey, but everyone knows that
Yeah.
Thomas Massey was up against APEC. I mean, we all know that. And who won? Well, APEC won. Why? A lot more money. But and that's where you know, besides being an agent of a foreign power, Israel, it didn't even have to be Israel. It just shows money wins. That if you want to look at simple, money wins. And he was in many ways, I don't look like he was outvoted. He was just outspent. And it goes into it that money rules in America. And like I said, I've looked at Donald Trump much different. I kind of knew. I knew that he was a bit of a sleazy businessman. It happens. It comes with the territory. We get that. But I'll tell you, he has really topped the cake when I'm talking about, again, utilizing the White House for his personal financial gain. And then it's just, again, we live in a corporation and money rules. And and I keep telling people, they said, David, I meet people from around the world, especially in Hong Kong, and they say, is America a good place to live? And I give an honest answer. I said, well, if you have a lot of money, it's a good place to live. Because this is a land where money creates power, money creates opportunity. And let me also advise people, we have this false dream of America with freedom. Well, there's two problems. One, our freedoms are decreasing. We don't have freedom of speech anymore in America. But there's also a correlation between money and freedom. Without money, going to college, going on vacation, buying food, I mean, money is an opportunity for life. So as the money, and this is what's happening, the middle class is getting hollowed out. So there you are, we'll just say you're living at a low income. It doesn't matter how much, even if the freedoms in America are increasing, and they're not, they're decreasing. Well, if you're a low income person and you're living even in a capitalist society like America where you need money, how much freedom you have. So we have to have money in America to have those opportunities of freedom. So, like I said, the concept of freedom is going away, just like the middle class has been hollowed out. But I say again, I'm not one of these people that left America and said I hate America. No, I just think it's going to collapse. But I do think if you're a high income or especially a rich person, yeah, I think America could be an awesome country. But that's what I keep saying about that income inequality. The middle class and everything, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you have a low income, it doesn't matter what this concept of freedom is. Without money, it's hard to have opportunities in this capitalist society where you need money to do stuff. So, like I said, I just think it's a dying dream. And people said, what happened to the American dream? Well, if you look at history, I think in one ways it was achieved. And what happens after you achieve your dream? Well, then that's where you get with the decline. Meaning every great empire achieved greatness and then it starts leveling down. And I believe we have already transgressed the peak of our empire. It could have been literally in the 1950s, by the way, meaning it could have literally been, and that's where the baby boom generation came, the land of milk and honey. But I think we have been on decline for decades now. And this is where I don't necessarily blame Donald Trump. I don't blame the Democrats. I think it could literally be in the history books that empires rise and empires fall.